According to 90% of the internet, Nikola Motors is yet another failed startup in the making, as they are potentially just a rebranded version of the Iveco company in Europe. As we have seen countless times over the past 2 years, the goalpost has continued to shift when it comes to addressing and finding things to not like around Nikola Motors. Back in 2020, the argument was that this business had no product and that it was linked to Trevor Milton. And now in 2022, now that Trevor Milton has been indicted for fraud, not Nikola Motors, and the company has sold $18 million worth of real trucks to customers, the arguments against this business are now that the products are just not good enough and that the business has simply no competitive advantage. Well, in this video, I'm going to debunk all those myths because there's obviously a lot of false narrative on social media around this business from folks who simply want the company to fail for no other reason than to seem right. But as usual, guys, before we get into it, make sure to drop me a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. So to start things off, I want to actually have Nikola themselves address this big question that so many skeptics raise about this business, which is what is the competitive advantage that Nikola brings to the table if they're simply selling electrified and rebadged Iveco trucks? And well, after reading Nikola's response and doing a lot more research on this EV industry, the answer will surprise 99% of you. And here it is. Mark Russell, the CEO, in the Q2 2022 earnings call said that first of all, unlike other companies, Nikola is the only US Class 8 semi-truck manufacturer which are also building and planning to sell trucks in the European heavy-duty market. You can't simply compare this company to Rivian, Tesla, Amazon, or Ford because those companies simply have and target completely different market segments with a completely different value proposition. For Nikola, the key edge they have is they're the very first purpose-built OEM in the Class 8 electric market. As a matter of fact, there's no other company on this earth right now that sells Class 8 battery electric vehicles on its own, meaning the company is not a subsidiary of another business, or it's not a simple branch like Hyundai or Toyota. And as I've mentioned many times in the past, because of that, Nikola can pivot their business a lot more easily than any other company. Freightliner and Peterbilt have been in the Class 8 business in the US for over 30 years, yet they have not been able to commercialize a battery electric vehicle because obviously their business is already way too profitable selling diesel and natural gas trucks. So it's extremely difficult for that company to pivot into a money-losing business, which is electrification. And in this case, Nikola is the one taking on this risk by itself, which is exactly what is creating an investment opportunity for those that have the risk appetite and for those that see the longer-term vision. And guess what? This lack of attachment to the internal combustion engine business also allows Nikola to explore hydrogen infrastructure much more freely than any other company. This allows them to solve that chicken and egg problem by building hydrogen trucks and also guaranteeing hydrogen supply at the same time, allowing them to spark a market in the US for these very much needed vehicles. Don't get me wrong, what Nikola here is doing is extremely difficult, and there's a very high likelihood that they end up failing on most of their accomplishments they've set out for the next 10 years. But in my opinion, that is exactly what investing is. You're balancing the risk versus the reward. The reward potential here is a potential total addressable market north of $400 billion, with around 25% of that being in the US, which is right now an untouched market for electrification. And as we've already seen with a business like Tesla, the first mover advantage is extremely real in the electrification space. It allows the company to create a superior brand and a bigger customer loyalty, which again plays very big in the commercial business, unlike the customer end business for somebody like Tesla, Lucid, or Rivian. But obviously that's not the question that you guys wanted me to address. At the start of the video I mentioned, many people have been saying that Nikola's trucks are simply rebadged Ivecos, which means they have very little competitive advantage. Now, although that is true, where Nikola does indeed use the cab from the Iveco S-Way, there's a lot more context that that statement needs, which is exactly why so many folks are completely misunderstanding this business. You see, Nikola's mission is not to reinvent the Class 8 semi-truck. Their sole purpose is to build an electrified platform that is purpose-built for the BEV and fuel cell markets while allowing the back-end infrastructure to take place hand in hand. For example, Freightliner has been in the internal combustion engine trucking business for the past 50 plus years, and they recently announced in 2022 that they're launching their first battery electric Class 8 semi-truck, which was the e-Cascadia. But if you go on their website and scroll down, that e-Cascadia is nowhere to be seen. Instead, you need to actually scroll right for you to even be able to see the e-Cascadia's brochure, which is already supposed to be in mass production and sold to real customers. And so if the industry is headed towards electrification, why is Freightliner still focusing on marketing its traditional business? Well, the answer is money. These businesses are designed to please their shareholders. They don't want to invest in and build trucks that are going to make them lose money. And as I'm sure you can clearly see, this e-Cascadia truck is built on an existing internal combustion engine chassis because obviously their goal is not to reinvent the wheel. Instead, it's to electrify and show the proof of concept of a battery-powered semi-truck. And that right there is exactly what Nikola Motors is doing, except they are not being held back by their traditional internal combustion engine business. As a matter of fact, it's really funny. Even the Tesla Roadster, which was the beachhead product for Tesla back in 2004, was built on an existing Lotus Elise chassis. And the same idea takes place at that point as well. Tesla was simply trying to electrify an existing vehicle to demonstrate the purpose and commercialize and get to market ahead of its competitors. The revenue from that vehicle is what allowed them to scale up the Model S, which is obviously a reworked and built from ground up electric car. Now, did Tesla have to redesign and build this platform from the ground up? They didn't really have to, but they did because in the consumer business, it's really important to have a good brand image. And that is exactly why every single car on the road looks different from the other, except for the ones that are typically built by the same manufacturer. And so this argument around Nikola being a poor business because they have a cab that is borrowed from Iveco is simply a completely broken argument. But obviously I understand ignorance is very popular in the stock market. Even Tesla's own CEO and VP of sales had to explain to its investors back in March of 2008 that the Tesla Roadster is not a converted Lotus Elise because for some dumb reason that discredited Tesla's progress, which obviously made zero sense. And as we all know, electrification technology is very, very complicated, and it takes a lot of optimization, validation, and testing to ensure that these platforms can last to the specifications that Nikola or any other business markets their product to. And as somebody who's an engineer, I completely understand where Nikola and other businesses in this space are coming from. But obviously most folks in the stock market and the investment community are not engineers, so it's very hard for us to expect them to understand how difficult it is to do such a job. And for the folks that are laughing at Nikola today, you might as well have laughed at Tesla back in 2010. It took them 3 years to bring their alpha prototype into production, from 2010 to 2012. As a matter of fact, they went through a very similar process that Nikola is going through today, where they followed the alpha, beta, and validation timeline for commercializing their product. Now, Tesla had to do some extra steps because they were developing this chassis and the looks of the vehicle from the ground up because obviously they want to differentiate themselves from other companies. But overall, the process is extremely similar. As a matter of fact, today, it took Nikola faster to do this exact process with the tray. And as a matter of fact, at the very early stages, Tesla was actually buying old factories and assets to start building their cars. Nikola today has actually built a factory from ground up in less than a year and a half, which is obviously incredibly impressive given how difficult it is to build and mass produce these kinds of vehicles. And just like with Tesla's Model S, the recipe for electrification is always in the powertrain, the packaging, and the optimization, which translates to better range, higher durability, and overall a better driving experience for end users. But obviously guys, that is just my take on the situation, so let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below.